There were 600 people in that hall, and every one of them had spent 11 weeks telling each other the story of the brave woman who did not run. And I was about to stand up and tell them that the brave woman did not exist. That was the whole of my testimony. That was all I had. To save the King of Fellhollow, I had to unmake, out loud, in front of his entire court, the single most flattering thing anyone has ever believed about me. And I had to do it in a room that contained the man who had put something in his cup and who was counting on me being too vain, or too frightened, or too fond of my own legend to say the true thing. He had read me correctly on 2 of those 3. I was frightened, and I was fond of it. I had not expected to be, and I was. And I want that on the record, because it took me a long time to admit. I put my hand on the back of the bench, because I cannot stand for long without something to hold, and I stood up anyway. 11 weeks earlier, 600 people had scattered from an enormous wolf in the courtyard at Fellhollow, and I had stood perfectly still, and every single person there had drawn exactly the wrong conclusion about why. My name is Nedda, and I carried water at Fellhollow Keep, which is the lowest work in a great house, and which I was glad to have. I was 26 that summer, no family to speak of, no house behind my name, and a left leg that had been broken when I was 9 and set by a man who did not know how, and had healed short and wrong, and had ached every day of the 17 years since. I want that plain at the front, because everything in this story comes from it, and because everyone who tells this story leaves it out. I cannot run, not a few steps, not to save my life. I can walk all day, slowly, with a stick, and I can stand for a while if there is something to hold, and I can carry water, which is why I carried water, because it is fixed work, at a post, and a keep needs its jugs filled, and does not much care how fast the girl filling them moves between them. I had learned, by 26, exactly what my leg meant in a dangerous world. It meant that in a fire, or a fight, or a stampede, I would not be getting out. Everyone else in a crowd has a plan, and their plan is run. I have never had that plan. I have spent my entire life doing a different sum in every room I enter. Not where is the door, but where do I stand when the running starts, so I am not knocked down and trampled by everyone who can. That is not courage. That is arithmetic. And I need you to understand it before I tell you what happened in the courtyard, because 600 people watched me do that arithmetic and called it something else. The gathering was the summer assize, the great yearly meeting, every ranked house in the territory, 4 days of law and feasting in the courtyard at Fellhollow. I was on the water table at the north end, which is a post, and I stood at it for 6 hours a day for 3 days, and my leg was screaming, and I was glad of the work. On the 3rd afternoon, the King of Fellhollow's wolf came out of the west door at a dead run. I want to describe what a crowd does, because I have never forgotten it. 600 people, most of them wolves themselves, most of them armed, and every single one of them went the other way. Not gradually. All at once, like water finding a drain, 600 people turning and running from an animal the size of a cart horse that had come out of a door it should not have come out of. And I stood at my table because I could not do anything else. There was no bravery in it. I did the sum I have done my whole life in about a second and a half. 60 feet of open ground to the nearest wall. A leg that will not carry me. 600 bodies moving between me and it. And I understood, the way I have understood in every room since I was 9 years old, that my only chance was to be a thing that did not move. So I put both hands flat on the table, and I locked my knees, and I stood there, and I waited to find out what was going to happen to me. The wolf came across that courtyard, and everyone else was gone. And he came to me, because I was the only thing left standing in an empty yard, and about 10 feet away he slowed. He was not hunting. I want to say that clearly, because I have heard 400 versions of this story, and every one of them has him stalking toward me like doom. He was not. He was staggering. Up close. At 10 feet, in an empty courtyard, I could see that the most feared animal in the north was shaking, a fine, constant tremor, all down him, his head low, his back legs not entirely agreeing with his front ones, and there was foam at his mouth that was the wrong colour, and his eyes were wide and blown and entirely wrong. He circled me once. I have been told that this was the claiming, that a wolf circles what he chooses. I have never had the heart to tell the people who say it, that he circled me the way a drunk man circles a chair he is about to fall into, and then the wolf of the King of Fellhallow lay down at my feet, hard, more of a collapse than a lying down, and put his enormous head across my boots, and did not move. Not a claiming. He had gone down. He had crossed 60 feet of empty ground to the only still thing in a scattering world, and chosen where to fall, because whatever was in him was taking him, and he had about 4 seconds of choosing left, and he spent them getting to a place where he would not be alone when it happened. I know that because I was the only person there, and I know it because I put my hand on his head, which was the single stupidest thing I have ever done, and he was burning hot and shivering, and he made a sound that no one else heard, and that I have never repeated to anybody except the man it belonged to. Then 600 people came back. They came back slowly, in a ring, and what they found was a water carrier standing perfectly still, with the king's wolf lying across her feet, and every single one of them had been facing the other way for the whole of it, and had seen nothing at all, and so they filled in the middle for themselves. By nightfall, there was only one version. The wolf of Fellhallow had broken loose at the assize. 600 souls had fled, and one woman had stood her ground without flinching. And the king's own wolf had gone to her, and lain at her feet in front of the whole territory. It is a very good story. I understand entirely why it went across 3 territories in a fortnight. It has everything. It is also, from the first word to the last, wrong. King Roderick came to the water table himself the next morning, which is not a thing that happens, and stood in front of it with the look of a man who has been awake all night. They tell me my wolf lay down at your feet. Yes, Your Grace. I do not remember any of it. He said it very levelly, which I have since learned is what that man does with fear. I remember the west corridor, and then I remember the physician's room 4 hours later. 4 hours. That has never happened to me in my life. And I looked at the King of Fellhallow and understood that he did not know. Your Grace, I said, your wolf did not break loose. I do not think anyone had spoken to him plainly in some time, because he went very still. He was ill, I said. He came out of that door already going down. He was shaking before he reached me, all over, and his mouth was the wrong colour, and he did not choose me. He chose somewhere to fall, and I was the only thing in that yard that had stopped moving. Whatever happened to him happened before he came through that door, and I am the only person here who saw it, because I was the only person here who did not run. He stared at me for a long moment. Why did you not run? And I said, because it was the truth, and because I had not yet learned what the truth was going to cost me. Because I can't, Your Grace. My leg. I never can. Roderick of Fellhallow looked down at my stick, propped against the water table where it always was, in plain view, where it had been in plain view for 3 days, and for 4 years before that, and I watched the last piece of it arrive in him, and he shut his eyes. You could not get away, he said. No. 600 people ran, and the one who could not is the only one who saw. His hand was flat on my table. Mistress, I have been told a great many times since yesterday that a brave woman stood her ground for me. Nobody told me she had no ground to give. That was the beginning of it. Not the wolf. That. He came back to the water table. That is the part I still find difficult to explain to people, because it sounds like the romance, and it was not. not for weeks. It was two people trying to work out what had happened to one of them, and the only witness was a lame water carrier, and the only other person who could be trusted with it was the man it had happened to, because we could not tell anyone. That was clear. Within about 4 days, and it is the trap the whole of this story sits inside. If the king of Fell Hollow had been dosed, if someone had put something in an alpha king that took his wolf away from him for 4 hours in front of 600 people, then the thing everyone needed to know was also the single most dangerous fact in the territory. An alpha king's authority is not paper. It is the understanding, held by every ranked house in the north, that he is the strongest thing in the room and cannot be moved. And the moment that room learns he can be unmade, quietly in a cup, by anyone with access to his table, then he is not a king anymore. He is a man with a target on him, and 400 people doing arithmetic. So the crown could not say it, and the crown could not investigate it loudly. And, in the meantime, the territory had already provided its own explanation, which was warm and romantic, and completely false, and, worst of all, useful, because the king's wolf lost control at the assize is the beginning of a challenge, and the king's wolf chose a woman at the assize is a love story. The same 4 hours, 2 stories, and one of them keeps a king on his throne. Lord Averin, the Chancellor, explained this to me himself in the second week, with enormous courtesy, in a small room, and I want to be fair to him, because he was not wrong, and he was not cruel. "You are being made into something," he said. "I imagine you have noticed. The whole territory now has a story about you, and it is a very good story, and it is holding this crown up, and I am going to ask you not to correct it." He folded his hands. "Not to lie, simply not to correct. If you tell them the wolf was ill, you tell every enemy this king has that he can be put on the ground with a cup. If you tell them you could not run, forgive me. Then the story that is currently protecting him becomes a joke about a lame girl who was in the way, and the other story comes back, and Lord Dane will have his challenge inside a month. So I'm to be brave. You are to be silent, mistress, and let them be brave on your behalf." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I am aware of what I am asking. So for 11 weeks, I was the woman who did not run. I want to tell you honestly what that was like, because the tidy version has me suffering nobly under it, and I did not at first. It was wonderful. I had been a lame water carrier for 4 years, and invisible for all of them. And suddenly, I could not cross a courtyard without someone stepping aside. Ranked women who had never once looked at me asked my opinion. A guildsman gave me a stick. A good one, black wood, better than anything I had ever owned. Because he had heard I favoured a leg from an old hurt, and he wanted the woman who stood her ground to have something worthy of her. I took it. I still have it. I have never been able to decide whether I am ashamed of taking it. That is the part I did not expect. Nobody warns you that being admired for a thing you did not do is not simply uncomfortable. It is lovely, and it gets into you, and every day you do not correct it, you are a little more committed to it, and by the 11th week I had a stick I did not deserve, and a legend I could not put down, and a growing, quiet terror of the day somebody found out, and Roderick knew all of it, and never once used it, and that is when I stopped being able to think of him as the king. His wolf came back to me in the 4th week, not dramatically. I was at the water table at dusk, and an enormous animal came and lay down beside it, and put his head on my boot, exactly as he had in the courtyard, and this time he was not shaking, and this time there was nothing wrong with him at all, and he simply stayed there for 2 hours while I filled jugs. "He has been trying to get to you since the assize," Roderick said, appearing at the table with the expression of a man who has given up. "I have told him no 11 times. He does not care. He goes to the water table, and he lies down, and he will not be moved, and the entire household now knows the schedule of my wolf's visits to a water carrier, and Knut has begun writing them down. Writing them down? There is a list, Nedda. He looked genuinely haunted. My second is keeping a list of the times my wolf visits you. He says it is for security. It is not for security. Why does he come? And Roderick said slowly, because you put your hand on his head. He was not looking at me. In the courtyard, when he was going down and could not do anything about it, and every other soul in the territory was running the other way, a woman who could not get away from him chose to put her hand on his head instead of screaming. He has not forgotten it. I have not forgotten it either, and I was not even there, and I am aware that makes no sense at all. I did not know yet what had actually been in that cup, or which of the men eating at the king's own table had put it there. If you want to find out what a water carrier saw that 600 running people did not, and what it costs to stand up in front of a court and unmake the best thing anyone has ever believed about you, stay with me. What I remembered in the 11th week is the reason there is still a king in Fell Hollow. Lord Dane filed his challenge in the 9th week, and he did it properly, which is what made it dangerous. He did not accuse anyone of anything. He simply petitioned, gravely and with great regret, for a formal examination of the king's fitness, citing the assize, where 600 witnesses had seen the king's wolf run loose among his own people, and citing the 4 hours the king could not account for, and asking the only question that mattered, which was whether a man who loses his wolf in a crowded courtyard can be trusted to hold the north. Every word of it was true. That is what I have learned about the dangerous ones. They never need to lie. And the Crown's only answer was the love story. Averin built the whole defence on it, that there had been no loss of control at all, that the king's wolf had gone with purpose across that yard to a woman he had chosen, that the entire incident was a claiming and not a collapse, and that 600 people had run from a courtship. It was a good defence. It was better than the truth. And it depended, entirely and completely, on a lame water carrier standing in a hall and letting 600 people go on believing she had stood her ground for love. I would have done it, I think. I want to be honest about that. I had 11 weeks of being someone, and a blackwood stick, and a story that was holding up a man I had come to. I had 11 weeks of it, and I think I would have stood in that hall and said nothing, and let them all be brave on my behalf. Except that in the 11th week, I remembered the cups. Something in me went very still and very clear. I carried water. That is what I did, all 3 days of that assize, at the North Table, and the North Table is where the ranked houses take their cups between sittings, and a water carrier sees every hand that reaches for one, because that is the entire job. You do not look at faces when you are pouring. You look at hands and cups all day, for 6 hours, until you can tell a man by his rings and his reach, without ever once meeting his eye. And on the 3rd afternoon, perhaps a quarter of an hour before the west door opened, the king's own cup had gone back to the west corridor from my table. The plain silver one with the worn boss, which I had filled 4 times a day for 3 days, and could have picked out of 100, and it had gone back in a hand that was not the cupbearer's. I remembered the hand, not the face. I had never once looked at the face, but I had spent 3 days looking at nothing but hands, and this one had a ring on the middle finger, worn on the inside, turned in, which is what a man does with a ring he does not want caught on things, and which is a thing I had noticed 100 times without ever knowing why my eye kept catching it. Lord Dane wore his signet turned in. He had done it, I found out later, since a bad break in his knuckle in the year 11. I did not go to Averin. I want that on the record. I went to Averin's opposite. I went to Newt, the king's second, who kept a list about a wolf and a water table, and who I trusted for exactly that reason, and I told him what I had seen, and I watched an enormous grey soldier go the colour of ash, because here was the trap. and Canute saw it before I did. The only witness to the dosing of the King of Fellhallow was a lame water carrier. Her testimony was the only thing that could name Lord Dane, and her testimony required her to say in open court that the king's wolf had been ill and staggering and out of his own control in front of 600 people, which is precisely the thing Dane's challenge alleged, and precisely the thing the Crown's entire defence existed to deny. To convict him, I had to prove his case for him. I had to stand up in that hall and destroy the love story that was holding the king on his throne, tell the entire North that an alpha king can be put on the ground with a cup, and unmake myself in front of 600 people, and hope that the truth, arriving all at once and in the worst possible form, was stronger than the beautiful lie. Averin begged me not to, genuinely begged, which I do not think that man had done in 20 years. He said, and he was right, that I might destroy the king in the act of defending him. Roderick did not beg me. He did something much harder. He came to the water table on the night before the hearing, and he said, "Averin has told you what it cost the crown. I am going to tell you what it costs you, because nobody else in this keep will. If you stand up tomorrow, you will lose the only good thing that has ever happened to you. You will hand back 11 weeks of being looked at, and you will do it in the most public possible way. And every one of those 600 people will spend the rest of your life saying, 'Oh, the lame one, the one who couldn't run. We thought she was brave. You are the only person who can save me tomorrow, and the price is the entire life you have had since the assize.'" His hands were flat on my table. "I am not going to ask you for that. I would rather lose the throne than ask you for that. If you stand up tomorrow, you will do it, because you decided to, and if you do not, I will never once raise it, and I will go on being grateful for the 11 weeks either way." And I said, "You've just made it impossible for me to sit down, you understand." "Yes," said the King of Fellhallow. "I noticed that as I was saying it. I am not sorry." I stood up. "I want to tell you what it was actually like, because it was not noble, and it was not clean." I put my hand on the back of the bench because I cannot stand for long without something to hold, and 600 people looked at me with enormous warmth, the brave woman standing to defend her king, and I opened my mouth and took it away from all of them. "I did not stand my ground at the assize," I said. "I could not run. My leg was broken when I was 9, and set wrong, and I have never in my life been able to run. And when the wolf came into that courtyard, I did the sum I have done in every room since I was a child, which is that I cannot get out, and the safest thing I can be is still. That is all it was. There is no brave woman. I am sorry. A great many of you have been very kind to me for 11 weeks about a thing that was arithmetic. The hall made a sound I will not forget. And because I could not run, I said over it, I was the only person in that yard facing the right way. And I am going to tell you what 600 running people did not see. The king's wolf was ill. He came out of that door shaking, all down him, with his mouth the wrong colour and his eyes blown. And he did not choose me, he chose a place to fall. And he fell, and it lasted 4 hours. And Lord Dane is right that his king lost his wolf in a courtyard. And Lord Dane knows it better than anybody in this room, because Lord Dane carried the king's cup back to the west corridor a quarter of an hour before it happened, in his own hand, with his signet turned in. I have never heard a room go like that. Not a shout, a kind of vast intake, 600 people understanding at once that the story they had all been enjoying for 11 weeks was a bandage over something considerably worse. Dane moved. Of course he did. He was finished the moment I said the ring, and men like that always move once. He came off the bench toward the front, and the hall came apart into shouting, and everyone rose at once. 600 people standing up in a hall all at the same time. And I was in the middle of it, holding a bench in a crowd, with a leg that has never once got me out of anything. I went down, It was not heroic. I was knocked off the bench in a surge of people who were not trying to hurt me and were not at that moment capable of seeing me at all. And I went into the flags on the bad leg, and it broke in the place it had broken when I was 9. I do not remember much of the rest. I am told Canute had Dane on the floor before the king reached him, and I am told the king reached me rather than Dane, which caused a certain amount of comment, and, I am told, a great deal else that I have decided to believe, out of vanity. The leg is worse now. That is the plain fact of it. It healed a second time, and it healed shorter. And I used 2 sticks in the winter, and there are 3 things I could do at 6 and 20 that I cannot do at 9 and 20. And I have made my peace with 2 of them. Dane went to trial, and it took a year, because a challenge and a poisoning are separate matters in Fellhollow law, and both of them had to be done properly. He never confessed. He argued right to the end that carrying a man's cup is not a crime, and that a water carrier who admits she never looks at faces is no witness at all. And he was not wrong about either. And what convicted him in the end was not my testimony, but the apothecary in Coram who had sold the compound twice, and who remembered him, and who came forward only after I had made it safe, to by standing up first. That is how it usually goes, I have found. The witness who goes first is rarely the one whose evidence hangs the man. She is the one who makes it possible for the second witness to exist, and here is the cost that mattered more than my leg. I was right that the truth would get out, and I was right to tell it, and it did exactly what Averin said it would do. Every ranked house in the north now knows that an Alpha King can be put down with a cup. That knowledge is out, and it does not go back in. Fellhollow spent 2 years harder and more guarded than it had been in a generation. Tasters, and locked stores, and a king who does not eat at his own assize any more. And Roderick has never once told me it was the wrong choice, and I have never once been entirely sure it was the right one. Some things are true and dangerous at the same time, and I have stopped pretending that saying them is automatically brave. Roderick asked me in the spring, and he did it the way he did everything, which was by taking away every reason I might have had to say yes, for the wrong cause. He came to the water table. It was still my post. I had refused to be moved off it, which was a fight. "Before I ask you anything," he said, "there is a paper." Of course there was. It grants you the pension of a crown witness in your own name for life. Whatever happens to me, the same as any man maimed in the Crown's service, which is precisely what you are, and which Averin has confirmed in writing and hated every minute of. It is signed. It cannot be undone by me. You do not need this keep, and you do not need me, and if you tell me to go, you will be exactly as provided for tomorrow as you are tonight. You've pensioned me, so you can ask me a question. I have made you a woman who cannot be starved into an answer, said Roderick of Fellhollow. You have spent your whole life doing sums about how to survive rooms you cannot leave. I would like there to be at least one room in your life where the sum comes out the same, however you answer. I kissed him first, at the water table, with a stick in one hand. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since I was 9 years old, and learned that a room is a thing you cannot get out of. 3 years on, they still tell the story wrong. I have stopped fighting it, mostly. The territory wants the brave woman who stood her ground, and no amount of standing up in a hall and saying I could not run has ever quite killed her. And the version the children get told in Fellhallow is entirely the wrong one, and I have made an uneasy peace with being the least accurate legend in the north. What I did instead was build the other thing. Every keep in this territory now has a standing order about crowds, and it is mine, and it is 9 words long. Count who cannot leave a room before you fill it. Every assize, every gathering, every hall, someone is responsible for knowing who in that room cannot run, and where they will stand when it goes wrong. And it has been law for 2 years, and it has already mattered twice, once at a fire in Coram. There are people alive because 600 people once ran from a courtyard and left one woman standing at a water table. I still carry water sometimes, at the assize, from a chair which the household finds ridiculous, and which I do because it is my post, and because I have a very good view of hands from there. Roderick's wolf still comes and lies across my feet, every day, more or less, and Knut still keeps the list, 3 years of it, which he presented to me bound in leather at the wedding, as though it were a gift and not a threat, and which I treasure. And the blackwood stick, the good one, the one the guildsman gave the brave woman who did not exist. I still use it. I thought for a long time about giving it back. I did not, in the end, because a woman came up to me in the 2nd year at Coram and told me she had a girl with a foot that turned in, and that the girl had been ashamed of her stick until she heard about mine, and was not ashamed of it anymore. So the legend was wrong, and the stick was unearned, and a child in Coram stopped hiding her foot, and I have decided that I can hold all 3 of those at once, and that this is probably what an honest life looks like from the inside. I still wonder about the 600, honestly, not about Dane. Dane wanted a throne and put something in a cup, and there is no mystery in a man like that. The 600. Every one of them ran, and every one of them was right to run, and not one of them was a coward. That is simply what a crowd is. That is what bodies do, and I have never once blamed a single person in that courtyard. But 600 people looked at a woman who physically could not flee, and decided she was the bravest of them, and kept deciding it for 11 weeks. And went on deciding it, after I stood up and told them the truth in plain words. Tell me in the comments why you think we do that, why a room full of people would rather have a brave woman than an honest one. I have had 3 years and a 2nd broken leg to think about it, and I still do not have an answer I like. Comment, the water table, if you want to hear what Roderick's wolf did the first time Knut tried to move my post somewhere more dignified. And if you want more nights like this, 1. A king who could be unmade with a cup, a woman who could not run, and therefore saw everything, and 600 people who all faced the wrong way. Stay close. There is more of Fell Hollow left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.